This is Niccolo Machiavelli. He was a political servant in Italy who is going to be a sort of an author of a famous book called The Prince. And in it, he's going to try to outline some very sort of simple political thinking that in many ways, for us who live in the modern world, are sort of like, yeah, duh. But for the time period, were very controversial, because what he is going to advocate is a direct sort of overturning of some of the long-term ideas about political theory and about the role of monarchs and the relationship to the divine Christian God. He is going to become a realist, and he's going to sit there and say, wait a second, and he's going to offer us, within his book called The Prince, some interesting ideas. We like to use him when we cover the idea of the Renaissance because he will express in a very simple and clear manner the way in which many of the politicians, especially those in Italy, were operating in the 13th into the 14th and early 15th centuries. He died in 1527, so he was politically active and working in his career in the 1490s. There was a situation where he was eventually kicked out of the city of Florence, where he used to work as a politician. He had served as an ambassador. He'd served as an advisor to many of the politicians in the city. He had a very wide-ranging, realistic, non-Christian career as a civic officer and politician. And in the concept of time, when he was expelled from Florence, he left and had to go into exile, and he wanted to put together what he was going to say was the most important part about politics. And that's when he wrote the book, The Prince. It is essentially a conversation about the concepts of political power, how you get them, how you use them, how you keep them. And it's a very sort of a practical-minded kind of a guide to a politician, right? With the idea that a politician is not a Christian saint. The politician is not perfect, is not divine, but has to make decisions that impact the lives of many, many people, and must find the best way to do that. And the best way to do that is to not be shackled to one simple belief system, but instead to be essentially realistic. Okay? He had learned from Florence's city politics. Very quickly, your book will note that by 1494, the French have invaded what you know as modern-day Italy, and Italy, the peninsula of Italy, becomes a sort of a battleground between major influences of the French royal family and later on the Spanish and the Aragonese royal family in Spain. Italy is sort of a playground for other people. And in that context, the balance of power, so to speak, the struggle to have independence amongst the many city-states in Italy used to be just amongst themselves, and now it's between themselves plus outside invaders like the French and later on the Spanish and the Habsburg family. The difficulty here is that there is a very, very thin line between what is diplomacy and what is lying, and many people are going to have a hard time with that, and that's why Machiavelli is going to prove to be an interesting character. All right. Inside The Prince, he lays out explicitly that a prince, in order to keep power, must let his conscience sleep. Okay? And what they mean by that is to sort of lay aside your dreams, lay aside what you think is the right thing, the proper thing, the Christian or moral thing that you need to do. And instead of being hostage to that kind of idea, take a step back and think in realistic terms. What really needs to get done? How should I behave? What should I say? What should I do? And to help summarize that idea, within The Prince, Machiavelli simply puts it this way. Can a prince who goes to his people and is working with them, would he rather be loved by them or feared by them? Now, some of the older political thinking about princes had emphasized the idea of Christian duty, fulfilling the needs of God for the people, that the monarch, the prince, the leader of the state was going to help the people in a moral context of Christianity. That was a powerful idea for a long time, but the reality was, as you look at many of the kings and queens and other people who operated in medieval Europe, no offense, but to be a good prince, a good leader, sometimes you got to lie, you got to cheat, you got to steal. Now, not in the sense that you're doing it arbitrarily, but if your role as a leader is to protect your people, does that include sometimes deceiving the enemy? Does that include sending an ambassador and lying to your potential enemy? And I think we would have to agree, well, yeah, that's how it works. Machiavelli is simply taking a look at that kind of reality where many people are sort of thinking that there's this idea of a Christian prince, and this Christian prince will be dutiful and honest and kind. And then Machiavelli, looking at his own career, looking at the invasion of the Italian peninsula by the French and others, kind of suspends that for a second and says, listen, if you are going to try and base your political career on everybody loving you, he basically outlines how they love you when the times are good, and they love you when things are fine. And the moment there's a challenge to them or their wealth or their security, all of a sudden they don't love you so much and they walk away from you. Instead, what Machiavelli wants to propose is that a prince should make sure that his people fear him. Not in the arbitrary sense that, the prince is going to show up and, kidnap my children today. Not that kind of fear. The fear that you should follow what the prince does, you should listen to him. He's got an army, he has diplomacy, he's a serious guy. You got to make sure that you are fearing your prince because he's the one who has power over you. So instead of pursuing someone's love, which Machiavelli says will fail very quickly, he says that in order to run a better state, to create a better state and maintain a better state, you must have the fear of the people, otherwise they will leave you. With that idea in mind, take a look at the ideas of Machiavelli and the sort of machinations and all the craziness of Italian politics in the time period around 1500, and take a look at how he is trying to find a way to reflect on what's happening around him and recognize that this idea of a dutiful, Christian-bound prince is in many ways ineffectual, but in other ways also harmful, because a real prince has to make tough decisions about war and peace, about diplomacy, about taxation, and to be guided simply by the idea of what will I do to make people love me is not an effective strategy to control them. Take a look at that in your reading, and then see if there's any of the practice questions that touch on the ideas of what Machiavelli is talking about in this era.